tariff is Trump's favorite word in English dictionary. I believe he said that at some point. Although I wouldn't recommend asking him what tariff is because I have a suspicion he doesn't even know what it means. What sort of fuels my suspicion is his intention of setting up what is it, XERS, External Revenue Service, basically to collect these tariffs, which from the onset is dumb because there were tariffs in the past and they are collected by IRS because they are taxed on Americans. They are taxed on American manufacturers who, let's say, when they want to import something, they have to pay it. They have to pay it from the price of the product. Now, in some cases, I believe some people can negotiate basically splitting the cost, but the base cost of it, or the by default, it goes to the manufacturers. And so in that way, it is absolutely a tax on Americans. And if anybody tries to tell you anything else, he is trying to mislead you. But today we'll talk a bit broadly. We knew this was going to happen. Now it did happen, and we knew what the response might be, and it did happen. Uh, so we'll cover that. Joining me today is James Valliant. Hey, James, and welcome to the Daily Objective. Now, first, I just mentioned something because this is what's sort of most disturbing to me again about the Trump's part. So when it comes to Canada, America, and Mexico, there was NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. I think generally a good idea, basically establishing a free trade zone in North America to get rid of tariffs, get rid of like these useless, really dumb things. Trump had some problems with NAFTA, so he renegotiated his own thing called the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. And now he's going against his own agreement by establishing tariffs. Now, technically, because of this agreement, there should be no tariffs. But when it comes to national emergencies, which Trump in his executive order called this a national emergency, basically it allows still to impose tariffs on certain things. I'll just mention, I believe it's supposed to be 25% on most things, which I think Canada exports to America about, I think it's like 400, 500 billion. So like half a trillion of both services and products. But there's also 10% tariff on some of the other things. I think usually like energy related, and those. But still, a big amount, like 25% might not sound like a lot, but especially if your margins are already thin, this might like completely eat out all of your profit, meaning completely wiping out a whole range of industries. But James, again, welcome to the Daily Objective. What do you make of this decision by Trump? Again, we knew it was going to happen, or he was at least talking about it, but now it actually did happen. We'll also go later into Canada's response.
Tr- Trump claims to be an advocate of capitalism, but he's obviously not. He doesn't understand the basics of the free market economy at all. One of the most well established points in the science of economics is the self-defeating, self-destructive nature of tariffs. For Adam Smith, often called the father of economics, he thought it was so obvious as anything else, the advocacy of tariffs, as to be on the face of it ludicrous. He had lived in a world where there were mercantilist countries that were attempting really hard to control and regulate foreign trade, and they were all uniformly self-defeating. Another great
Yeah,
economist, David
maybe
Ricardo.
maybe I can just mention on the history of it because there was belief of a zero-sum world. Basically, any sort of any money, anything coming out of the country, we are actually losing stuff. So basically, by sort of exporting resources and getting the gold in, getting the money in, that's the only way a country can become rich. So
Right.
basically, having a trade deficit, meaning more there's more things coming in than are going out, is sort of viewed as like you're losing money. This is literally like 16th or 15th century like mercantilist like understanding of the world.
And insanity, a trade deficit. We use the word deficit. It makes it sound like we have, a deficit in our checking account or a deficit in federal spending versus revenues. A trade deficit. Bring on the trade deficit. I'm getting more stuff from you than you're getting from me, and that's supposed to be a bad thing. Or another great economist, David Ricardo, famous for his law of comparative advantage. Uh, it is among any sane, rational economists, even unto this day, one thing that distinguishes a sane economist from this side of sanity from the other side of sanity is a belief that tariffs are always, always self-destructive. That you can start with the way Donald Trump talks about it. It is patently absurd when he says, I'm collecting money from foreign countries or from foreigners. That is not what's going on. Every dime of revenue that Mr. Trump might collect from a tariff is coming from an American. He has no capacity to tax foreigners. He has no legal capacity to tax foreign governments or foreign companies. All he can do is tax people, Americans, when they attempt to buy a foreign made good. So, as you point out, it's American manufacturers buying component goods, American consumers. But for him to collect a dime in tariffs, there has to be an American purchaser who's purchasing the foreign good, who's still willing to purchase the foreign good with the tariff, or he collects nothing. So it is simply a tax on Americans like any other. And he's proposing a giant new bureaucracy, I suppose, because all he loves, as you point out, the word tariff. It's one of his favorite words, as he indicates. He is selling with the very name external revenue bureau as opposed to internal revenue, the idea that this is coming from foreign sources. Not a dime of it comes from foreign sources. Every penny, every nickel he gets in revenue comes from an American who has purchased a foreign good. That's the only way he can collect a dime, and that's where it all comes from. So, and he's going to enshrine into the name of this bureaucracy the very BS fallacy that he's talking about. It's all from Americans, and it must hurt the American economy as a whole. If you have any doubt of this, I would urge you to read Henry Hazlitt's brilliant treatment of this in Economics in One Lesson. Anytime, and it's a classic example of the seen and the unseen. It may be that your tariff will protect a certain industry, that is to say, keep it alive, keep it going, like the steel industry. Maybe. As you pointed out, it could actually destroy the purchasing of that product altogether. It may make it out of reach for Americans to even do. But let's assume that somehow it's the other companies that are foreign steel companies are now at a competitive disadvantage. So we preserve our less efficient, because necessarily if American steel is more expensive than Japanese steel, then what we're doing is we're saying Americans have to pay more for steel, period. And we have to subsidize, if we can, our less efficient steel industry at the expense of the American consumer, who now has to have higher steel prices, rather than taking advantage of cheaper, more efficiently made Japanese steel. And if Americans can buy the cheapest product, then of course they have more money in their pocket to buy everything else, anything else. And so what doesn't get seen in the seen and the unseen in Bastiat Hazlitt terms is all the stuff that doesn't come into being because I have to spend more on steel. When you put a tariff on steel, what you're saying is insofar as Americans want to purchase steel, they have to spend more on it. That means they have less wealth to spend on other things. That means even to the degree that you're protecting the steel industry, you're hurting every other industry. It cannot be a net benefit to the economy. It cannot be a net benefit to the economy. It can either destroy our ability to buy the product, kill the industry altogether, or insofar as it does protect that industry, it makes Americans spend more for the product, steel. That's the only thing you're going to get. You're never going to get an advantage. And a trade war is really stupid. Hey, we want fair trade. It's not fair if Canada subsidizes or tariffs their industries because that puts certain industries in our country at a competitive disadvantage. Well, wait a minute here. We're getting cheaper insofar as they're doing that, they're subsidizing cheaper products for Americans. So if Canada shoots itself in the foot, is it a smart thing for us? Oh no, you're shooting yourself in the foot. So watch, I can shoot myself in the foot too when you respond in a trade war kind of fashion. Or if America says we're going to put tariffs on Canadian energy or Canadian whiskey, and Canada responds, well, we can put tariffs on your stuff too. Canada's doing the same. I said, Donald Trump is hell bent on shooting American consumers in the foot and producers, as you point out, in the foot. Canada says, "Oh yeah, well we can shoot ourselves in the foot and have more expensive." If in even insofar as it protects the industry, it can only do so at the cost of reducing my ability to buy everything else, higher prices on that thing. The best thing to do, of course, is to be able, is for your consumer, for your manufacturers, to be able to purchase the people who are the most efficient, cost effective at producing that good. That alone can be the best policy in terms of total greater wealth for the economy. Does that mean that we were reliant on someone, say, Japanese, let's say they make the most efficient steel. They have the lowest cost, most effective, most efficient, most productive steel production. Well, if it's an ally, presumably that makes us interdependent. If it's an enemy, like China, it seems to me the tariff is the wrong kind of way to protect yourself from your critical industry being taken by the Chinese. Why have diplomatic relations with them at all? Why not? Why, there are other forms of sanctioning your enemies, even short of war, that are going to work a whole lot better than tariffs. Insofar as you're trading with China and you're demanding a higher price for Chinese goods, all you're doing is pickpocketing American consumers and American manufacturers. And the only thing you're going to do is either destroy the market for the product altogether or drive up costs and make Americans total net poorer, less wealthy. That's all it can do. Now, more fundamentally, like any other tax, it is a violation of rights. And so you just go through it and understand that it is a tax. It's a tax on Americans. It is a tax which will necessarily reduce total production and living standards. It can only have that effect. And economists from across the political spectrum, even by this point, as I say, insofar as they're saying really scientific or sane economics, they understand this. They understand what Adam Smith and David Ricardo and Frederick Bastiat and Henry Hazlitt were saying, at least with respect to tariffs. On many other issues, the monetarists and Keynesians and a variety of others disagree. But one thing that the science of economics has, to my perception, have sunk in to any real scientific economist is that they're self-defeating. Necessarily, the total wealth in your country will be lower. In terms of the products available to your consumers, it will be lower. In terms of the total cost, you're making it higher. It does not help, cannot help inflation. It can only reduce living standards. It can wipe out an industry or a market, or insofar as it can actually protect, say, one industry, it must do so at the expense of every other industry.
Uh, there's many things to say. Someone says, lol, I'm Canadian and you're wrong. Before 30 days is gone, Canada will be back paddling and begging for mercy. We'll go to Canada in a second. But yes, Canada will suffer more. I mean, if I set myself on fire and I go into a crowd of people, yeah, it will be much worse for them than for me. But what kind of like rhetoric is this? What kind of view of world is this? The fact that, well, we're gonna screw them over more than they're gonna screw us, so we are winning in the end. Like you, Canada and America. I mean, I'll just mention a few things. Well, first, you mentioned the sort of like the right way to sort of respond to China, and someone mentioned that sanctions against Russia didn't work. Well, first of all, they did work. Russia's economy is like screwed. But also, I agree. They were. I don't think sanctions are enough. There should have been complete embargo on Russia. Russia is an Russia is even on a different level than China. Russia is actively meddling in our elections, like meaning both American and my own country, Slovakia, as well as most of the European nations. Russia is actively like threatening the sovereignty of many nations. The whole reason why NATO even exists is because Russia's threat to nations in Europe specifically and also abroad. So yeah, the way you deal with it, you don't have any relations. And the reason why European economies are failing is not because we are not trading with Russia, it's because we are refusing to produce ourselves. We are refusing to develop our own energy. Not even develop our own energy, but stop screwing over our own businessmen when they wanna try to develop some of our own energy.
Right.
Then
Narrowly targeted sanctions generally are going to have very limited effect. So, what you want to do is have no diplomatic relation. If you're really serious about China stealing intellectual property or being a military rival, or if it really is a national security threat for us to be buying some critical commodity from China, then what you do is you simply cut off all diplomatic relations. If you're going to trade with China at all, it's at your own risk. And practically zero trade, I can almost guarantee will be the result. But there are limits to even what a limited or targeted sanction can do. Uh, uh, Really, not a very good instrument for dealing with that. But when we're talking about Canada, it is
well,
true.
yeah, before we go into Canada, because there's so many other things I
Okay.
wanted to mention. Well, first, sort of, there is this, especially with Trump, there is this like obsession with manufacturers and manufacturing jobs. The reality is, any like industrialized, like heavily industrialized nations doesn't really want a lot of manufacturing. They're not good jobs. When it comes to really developed economies, there's so many more productive places to be. There's so many more productive places like information technology or service industry. There are so much both better for even people to work in. You shouldn't want like the same way we there are a bunch of ghost towns in America when it came to mining in the different areas in the West. We are not like, oh, we need to bring back the mining jobs. Like, no, let other countries that still have something to mine, first of all, and that they can make out of it. Why would you want to? And they were terrible jobs, by the way. They were.
Coal mining industry because we want to protect, we want to have all the coal miners in our country. It really does seem silly, but it is better to allow an ally to be the exclusive source of it if it's the cheapest source for
And
everyone.
Canada is perfect for that. Canada mining industry in Canada is one of the biggest industries. So again, like
The
even
fact
if you
that
yeah.
America can coerce Canada through this process, that is to say, we can make them suffer more than they can make us suffer. Now, think about that. We're making one another suffer. We're also, what he's ignoring is that we're making ourselves suffer in the first instance. So we're both making both of us suffer through the course of it. So, but simply because we can make Canada suffer more than we're going to suffer from the process and cause them to say, okay, uncle, we quit. We'll do whatever you want, does not justify it, nor does it make it better or good for America. That's not the point. It is worse for America. America's economy will be hurt as a whole. The American consumer will be poorer as a group. When you look at the total effect, it can only harm American wealth. It can only harm productivity. It can only harm the consumer in both countries. And the fact that America is so much bigger and Canada is so much more dependent on it in its economy, a much bigger percentage of its GDP comes from trade with the United States than a percentage of GDP than the American GDP is dependent on the Canadian economy. So what? That means we've got a bigger gun to coerce them. We can shoot ourselves in the foot so bloody bad, but the blood will splatter on them harder than when they shoot themselves in the foot. The blood will spatter on us. Does not justify shooting foot shooting, does it? Both
Yeah.
sides are going to hurt themselves in the process. It's madness. It really
Yeah.
is madness.
Now continue. I mean, another reason why And again, even when it comes to tariffs and sort of, wanting to bring industry back, as you mentioned, you also have to subsidize, basically, because those industries failed because they were not profitable, because they were not good. So just by putting on tariffs is usually not good enough to basically bring those things back. Usually you also have to subsidize it, which means even more government control. Which brings me to one of the things I really hate about whenever I go to America. Your Coke sucks because it's made with corn syrup. Whenever I go to America, I always drink the Mexican Coke, which is
Mexican
made
Coke
from.
is so much better. My wife totally agrees with you. I agree with you. Unfortunately, I live in Southern California where people bring in bottled Mexican Coke, and there's no question bottled
And
Mexican.
and the reason behind this is the subsidies, is because there was this idea of the fact that, well, we cannot be dependent on like cane sugar from different countries, so we have to subsidize our own corn
Artificial
industry.
sugar industry, which is that really horrible corn syrup and these artificial sweetener things, or our ridiculous sweeteners like corn syrup, which just fatten Americans up, and it's all a product of government subsidizing a certain industry. You're absolutely right. If we had a free trade when it came to agricultural products, we too in America could enjoy cheap cane sugared Coca-Cola. Great example, really good example, Dan.
Yeah, and something something that Trump mentioned when it came to these tariffs is that I think he acknowledged that there will be like like a pain period. There will be like some Americans will suffer, or basically will suffer a little bit. And my question is, why would you even go to if you know it's gonna be bad? Again, there is this thing because I'm trying to like put him in the best light I can find, trying to still man it. And there is such a thing called a shock therapy. Basically, when your economy is like so bad that the only way, that's what happened in Argentina with Milei. And he talked about it. He was basically saying, we are spending so much. We are so screwed. There is no other way of getting out of it besides some like heavy shock therapy, which meant they cut down the government spending, which meant the poverty in Argentina went up incredibly. Yet Milei has retained his popularity and has been able to communicate why is this happening. And the recession actually ended in Argentina, so he's able to sort of continue. But America's doing good. I mean, no matter what you hear from a lot of people what are saying, when it comes to, I mean, the last year's stock returns were like 27%. America is doing well. The something that is sort of bad is the when it comes to groceries prices. But when it comes to inflation, inflation is something that happens. And unless we have like 20% deflationary period, which again, you don't reach by putting on tariffs unless you have something like that, which is simply not understand not something you can achieve unless you're radically like change how the economy works. And that is something that should be explained to the American people. The fact that inflation has happened, it has cumulative effects, and now we can take different ways of basically getting out of it, or mentioning that the real wages are up. So despite the fact that grocery prices are up, every American is making more money, and in effect, it doesn't matter. But I'll just mention one more thing, then I'll go to you, James. But again, when it comes to these things, when it comes to shock therapy, I mean, something I mentioned to you, James, the idea of like, again, like the idea that when you're doing good, you want your people to suffer to like make them do better. Again, as something I've said, it's like when you don't want to like, you don't want to cut your hair, so you like take chemo. It's like this is not like a way you like deal with these things. With like when things are like marginally bad, there are so many actions you could take besides like tanking your economy.
That is a brilliant, brilliant comparison, a wonderful metaphor. Yeah, getting a haircut is inconvenient, so let me take chemotherapy. That is exactly what tariffs are. Now, if if American real wages are going up, it's because America's economy is getting more productive. The way to be more productive is not to subsidize less efficient industries. It's because of our innovation in computers, artificial intelligence, things like that, that make our high tech business, which is, comparatively in a free market situation compared to other industries in the United States, and improvements in technology, in computers and artificial intelligence, that productivity gain is what is always the thing that's fighting against inflation and increasing real wages. Now, what is Mr. Trump's goal here? Is Mr. Trump's goal to permanently collect? And he'll bring up the historical argument. Well, back in the late 19th century, the American federal government basically lived on a tariff. Well, the American federal government spent considerably less. It was a much smaller percentage of GDP, government spending. Most of the departments and agencies of our federal government simply did not exist. So if you're doing 95% less, you can get away with a much smaller, wherever your revenue is coming from, a much smaller thing. We had no income tax, whatever. But we had a small tariff, and that's basically what did support the American government. But does that make taxing okay? Does that make it economically efficient? No, it does not. What would make it more efficient is if you cut government back to the place where it was when we could do it by tariff. It was the government spending that was the problem there, and the advantage there. The world, why America was better in a time when we didn't have an income tax, but did have a small uniform tariff, mostly uniform tariff, was because government was spending 95% less and doing 95% fewer things than it is doing today. That's the difference, how much government is doing and spending. Now, I also want to ask, what the hell is his goal? Is his goal to permanently make this an income source for America, or is it really to coerce fair and free trade? Oh, really? I'm a fan of fair and free trade, and all I'm trying to do is correct the fairness situation. So, what if Canada capitulates and gets rid of whatever he wants to do, immigration policy or their tariffs or get removed? Would he get rid of it? He sounds like he wants it to be a permanent revenue source, in which case it's not going to create a world of more fair and free trade at all, is it? It's going to institutionalize unfair, unfree trade. So it's again, he's talking out of both sides of his mouth. His argument is incoherent. It's factually false. It's economic nonsense. It's grossly unfair and can only have the impact of impoverishing both countries comparatively.
Well, someone brings up the point I said. Trump is just establishing his dominance. I seriously doubt all these tariffs will remain in place through the entire admin. It's obviously just to start the negotiations. And yeah, that's one of the examples you can use tariffs. Basically, you put tariffs on a country and basically you hope to get something out of it. There's already a free trade agreement between Canada and USA. What is he negotiating? Like that's the one of the main reasons to sort of even go for this is because you don't want tariffs actually there. That's why when I mean we go to basically what happened is Canada in return responded with tariffs. Usually the reason for it is you want to also have some stake in it. Basically saying, okay, if you put tariffs on us, we put tariffs on it, and we can go to negotiating table and both of us can put them down. There were already no tariffs between these countries. There was already free trade. Why are you like starting this? Like, I think someone, I think some like second richest person in Canada came out that said blamed Trudeau for starting a trade war. And yeah, technically, if trade war only starts when the second person like responds, but like the situation was already solved. There was no like more solving that it needed. That's why I like this idea of like it's always said like
If
yeah.
they want to subsidize cheaper prices for Americans, then I say have at it, because that's in effect what they're doing. If they want to shoot themselves in the foot, does it make any sense for us to shoot ourselves in the foot? That's what it really amounts to. And if it was just a negotiating tactic, let's say Canada corrects its immigration policy to the way that Trump would like to see it, then he doesn't need a permanent bureaucracy like the External Revenue Service, does he? He wouldn't be boasting about how all this revenue that will be permanently coming in from foreigners, which is really only coming in insofar and to the extent that Americans purchase foreign products. So no, it is irrational and it is contradictory what Trump is saying about it. If he's trying to create fair and free trade, then he's going in the opposite direction. If he's wanting to create permanent revenue, then it's not about fair and free trade at all. If it is to coerce certain behavior, say on immigration policy, then it's just simply thuggish threats. Now, it's a bizarre kind of threat. You know, it's a kind of threat where you put the gun to your own head. You say, if you don't comply, I'll shoot. I'll shoot. It's again, it's madness, and it's madness for a country to get involved in the trade war to the extent that that other country is putting on tariffs or subsidies. Then what? Then what they're doing is hurting themselves, or they're subsidizing our consumers. Why on earth would you stop someone who is hurting himself when he's claiming to hurt you mostly? All he can do at most is to hurt a particular industry that you might have had a shot at trading in. So to that extent, but your total economy cannot be benefited, the total economy, and your consumer cannot be actually benefited by responding in kind with tariffs and subsidies. It makes zero sense from either side at any time.
Uh, Someone earlier said something about basically how are we becoming richer if GDP is going out and GDP per capita is going down, which I don't know what that even means because whenever GDP goes out, GDP per capita will, or sorry, whenever GDP goes up, GDP per capita also goes up because it's just GDP, but basically redistributed based on person. So unless you have like a lot of immigration, that's the only way the sort of GDP per capita can go down. And also, both of these are pretty bad. Like, sorry, James.
Or more babies born. Uh,
Yeah. But also both of these are.
It's American economy. Let's put it this way. It's a compared to what thing? Insofar as the American economy is doing well, it's not because of tariffs. It's because of productivity gains. It's because of, and in our case, it's easy to specify. It's because computers, artificial intelligence, most recently, things like that make each hour of an American labor's work more productive. It's increases in productivity that increase a nation's wealth, especially when it comes to something, a measure like per capita wealth. It has to be done on the productivity side. Insofar as we're able to survive all this federal spending, these huge deficits, this ridiculous government economic policy that we have in America, insofar as we've kept our heads at or above water, it's only been because the relatively free market portions of our economy, like in high tech, have actually increased the productivity of American labor. That's the only way to do it, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, and I mean something that we're kind of out of time, but something more to mention, because again, with I think Trump in a sense brought something sort of unique to politics or the way we think about it, and I think something that's more disturbing about what he's doing is the fact that he's allowed to do many of these things. Something to remember is pretty much everything he's done until now. I think for the most part, is pretty much in his powers, or some of the things might be challenged by the Supreme Court. We'll see that, but basically when it comes to sort of imposing these tariffs, I mean, Congress granted the authority to president. I'm not sure if it was since maybe Eisenhower or something like that. I think sometimes around Second World War or after Second World War, basically saying, yeah, you can do whatever you want, or relatively whatever you want with this. And again, that's like such a power to be given to again, executive branch, just like unilaterally, that I think it's sort of something to remember is that America should have some both separation of powers, and also we have how many? We have like 538 legislatures, we don't have one legislature in the White House, and sort of the way we shouldn't think of these things as like, well, Trump wants tariffs, so we're gonna have tariffs. I mean, again, there's so many things that like the Congress has forfeited the responsibility to. That's, I think, something that's even more scary. The fact that a lot of what Trump is doing is he can't do it.
I've said it before in other contexts on this channel, and I will say it again and again. I think it's unconstitutional what Congress has done in creating these regulatory agencies that combine rulemaking, rule interpretation, and rule enforcement all in one agency. That violates the very principle of separation of powers that our country was founded on. And it is an unfortunate fact that Congress has granted so much power to the executive branch, so much of its rulemaking authority to the president. I mean, we should not be living in a world where the law changes so radically based on who becomes president and issues dozens of executive orders, so that the operative law changes without Congress having to do a single thing. And in the case of tariffs, it's particularly vile, at least a degree. There are, if something becomes permanent, a non-emergency, or if something comes over a certain level, he will have to go hat in hand to Congress. My fear is that this Congress would go along with his stupid proposal, even if he wanted to enshrine it in law, about tariffs or an external revenue service. That is really madness. But basically, it's unfortunate that our presidents are so powerful that Congress has given the president and the executive branch generally so much power, is antithetical to the founding principles of this country. Yeah, we have it. It increases, it makes our president more and more and more of an authoritarian. Yes.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, what else? Oh, well, something to mention. Basically, in the executive order, he also set up basically a process when if retaliation comes in, he can basically increase tariffs again. So yeah, that's how trade works. You basically
Ourselves
increase it.
again in the foot. I'm going to shoot ourselves again in the foot. And the more they shoot themselves in the foot, we'll shoot ourselves in the foot. Madness, madness. Or as you point out, I think your metaphor is a whole lot better. But it comports with Trump's nationalism. But in effect, that's what he's saying. These haircuts are inconvenient. I don't like long hair, so let's take chemotherapy. Yeah, that's the better analogy.
We have a super
For instead of haircuts, right?
We have a super chat from Bonnie, thank you so much, and a super chat from Alex, thank you so much. Holy smooth tariff perpetuated Great Depression and led to Japan attacking Pearl Harbors. Pearl Harbor tariffs can lead to war. I'm not sure.
Is vital. I mean, if you want peace, make yourself economically interdependent. Absolutely. Free trade means, all other things being equal, greater chances for peace. Trade wars are often a prelude to real wars. Um, if, for example, America does have so much more powerful leverage over a country, and say it isn't Canada, sweet, peaceful Canadians, some other country, and they can't afford it, we're putting their back against the wall, and we're only increasing the chances that they'll change who they're aligned with or allied with. So yes, free trade and peace go hand in hand. Yes, sir. Ludwig von Mises pointed this out in his book Liberalism, and I agree with him. One of the reasons why America was at world war with Germany and Japan within the lifetime of my parents. Today, those are two of the countries where it's the most ridiculous to think that America would be going to war with. Why? Because we have such an interdependent economic relationship, in part at least. We do, it's also in part because now we share important values with them. But one component of that is that we're economically interdependent with the great economies of Germany and Japan, who are close, big trading partners. And that's a good thing. I know it
Yeah,
doesn't
I
compare
mean,
with Mr. Trump's collectivist nationalism. He can chest beat his nationalism, America first, and we need American steel, and we need American this and that. No, we don't. No, we don't. What the American consumer needs is the most efficient, effective, cheapest product, and that will make the American consumer wealthier than they otherwise would have been. It hurts all other manufacturers. It hurts all other service providers. It hurts the rest of the economy insofar as you impose a tariff. It's suicide.
Yeah, just something to mention. Trump again repeated the idea of USA annexing Canada, and again, I love the fact that it went from well, he's just joking or he's not taking it seriously to now we have people in the chat saying, yeah, America should annex more countries. So I'm
Well, Mr.
glad to
Trump,
see.
if that were to happen, that would eliminate all your tariffs. You cannot. The American states are essentially a free trade zone within one another. That would eliminate all this money, this revenue that you're going to
Yeah, but
collect,
there will be no trade deficit.
but there'd be no trade. Which shows you the artificial ridiculousness of that concept. Well, let me put it this way: the limited usefulness of that concept in the first place in this context.
Well, with that, we'll continue watching what's going to happen since apparently every day there's like a new thing we have to cover when it comes to Trump. I believe he's at almost 50 executive orders. Again, now we're only 2 weeks in. I think Obama had a few hundreds throughout his 8 years. It's definitely not ideal. Let's hope Congress can grab some more of its power back or
Get a
give it in its proper place.
job. Yeah, get a spine, do your job, take the political heat for a rule. If it's a bad rule, then we can let them vote you guys out of office. But don't spinelessly for political reasons, hand your rulemaking authority over to the executive. That always spells disaster, in my view, and violates the Constitution.
Well, I just mentioned one thing since we're already going over. While I was preparing for the show, I was thinking about the thumbnail and something. For those who don't know, one of my favorite game series called Fallout. It's like an alternative universe where basically um, uh, during Cold War, it basically splits off. And one thing that happens in that history is that USA annexes Canada. Well, something that happens shortly after is a global war, which is a nuclear war that wipes out all of pretty much all of human civilization. So let's hope we're not going anything close to that. Just for security, I would avoid annexing Canada just to be on the safe side.
So we don't risk it. Yeah, I don't want to annex Canada for a variety of reasons. Uh, but yeah, this is sheer madness on the part of Trump and factual nonsense that comes out of his mouth that sounds nationalistic and is in fact self-destructive and destructive of the American wealth, American well-being, and the American economy. Um, so it's America last, in fact, as he asserts it's America first in rhetoric.
But we'll continue covering. We'll also probably return back to Israel. More hostages were released, so that's great to hear. But we'll be back tomorrow with another episode of the Daily Objective as well as the reality show. Thank you, James, for joining me today. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and bye bye.
Bye bye.